Kazu believed in honest effort, and he rarely interacted with his classmates outside of class discussions. He lived with his older sister, who excelled in social circles and had little patience for Kazu's timid ways. When Kazu was in his first year of high school, he received special attention from teachers who noticed his consistent performance on quizzes and exams. Kazu began to grow increasingly popular among other students. In second year, Reina observed how teachers increasingly praised Kazu's methodical diligence and whispered about a potential scholarship opportunity that could secure his future. Though she carried her own shining academic record, she could not ignore the possibility of losing status to someone she considered unremarkable. She quietly planted seeds of doubt among her most trusting peers, letting vague speculations about Kazu cheating in exams spread through casual chatter. After a month, during a highly anticipated midterm, Reina seized her moment. With her lackey Hashi's help, she positioned a small, carefully prepared cheat sheet among Kazu's belongings. Once the exam was underway, Reina signaled for the teacher's attention. Upon inspection, the incriminating slip of paper was discovered, and the teachers, already wary from recent rumors, had little reason to doubt its authenticity. Kazu, blindsided by the accusation, found himself unable to refute evidence so cleverly planted, while Reina silently watched as his future prospects crumbled under a single, devastating setup. Further, Reina convinced her lackey Hashi to spread whispers that Kazu cheated on a recent important exam by stealing exam questions beforehand. This created confusion among the faculty. Kazu was brought before the teacher in charge, forced to listen to the accusations, and asked to prove his innocence. He had no way to do so, because the fake evidence looked convincing, and no one could confirm his honesty that day. As a result, his name was effectively blacklisted from the scholarship list. The emotional shock of this false accusation crushed his spirits. Some classmates ridiculed him, others avoided him entirely. Among the people who turned away was a girl named Hana, who had been a close friend since first year. She used to study with Kazu after class, often praising his consistent effort, but once the rumors circulated, she grew quiet and distant. One afternoon, when Kazu tried to explain his innocence, Hana merely shook her head and said, "I didn't expect this from you." Hurt flickered in her eyes, and she left without waiting for a response. The hollow feeling in Kazu's chest deepened. He was devastated that no one believed him anymore. Kazu's sister, who was a year older and had her own social life to protect, found the swirling talk embarrassing. She believed that Kazu's problem threatened to overshadow her own activities. She saw him as the cause of shame for both her and their family, even though he tried to explain that he had done nothing wrong. Over the following weeks, Kazu's mental state deteriorated. He often felt an urge to hide from everyone. He was forced to do cleaning tasks after class. Around that time, while cleaning a rarely used storage room, he discovered an old box of unused school supplies. Hidden within that container, he saw an antique pocket watch. The watch face was cracked, and it emitted faint ticking noises that seemed slightly out of sync with normal time. He decided to take it, thinking it might be a broken trinket he could repair or keep as a curiosity. Soon after he slipped the watch into his bag, he noticed strange sensations. He saw subtle changes in how the second hand of the watch moved. He heard small clicks even when the watch's minute hand did not seem to turn. At first, he told himself that stress must have been causing him to imagine things, but he kept the watch out of a silent fascination. On a cloudy afternoon, Kazu was alone, returning to an empty classroom to retrieve forgotten materials. Hashi had followed him quietly. Hashi pinned him against the wall and demanded that Kazu stay away from upcoming scholarship notices. Hashi said that if Kazu tried to reclaim any chance at any award, the rumors would intensify. He tried to protest, but Hashi's threat were clear. As Kazu took a step, the watch in his bag made a sharp ticking sound. Kazu felt a jolt, like static electricity, and time seemed to blur for a fraction of a second. He found himself a few steps back from where he had been, as if the last few seconds had reversed. Hashi repeated the same threat, with the same intonation. Kazu was confused, not sure if it was reality or just a trick of the mind. Regardless, this moment scared him enough that he ran before Hashi could do anything more. Hashi was left uncertain as to how Kazu suddenly slipped away in that repeated scene. Kazu went home shaken. He examined the watch in his room and tried replicating that static-like sensation. He twisted the small knob on the side, turned the second hand back by a few ticks, and suddenly he felt a wave of dizziness. The clock near his bed reversed by a few seconds, or so it seemed to him. He tested it again, walking a few steps, reversing the watch's second hand, and noticing he was able to stand back in his previous position. He realized the watch was letting him relive a few seconds. He found this bizarre, but also strangely liberating. He thought that if he could harness this effect, maybe he could avoid some humiliations or find ways to fight back. In the following days, Kazu experimented at school with minimal rewinds of few seconds. He discovered that it was enough time to dodge a small prank or redo a short conversation. For example, if Reina's group tried to trip him, he could blink back a second and sidestep. This change was so subtle that few noticed. Some classmates just thought he got lucky or that he was more alert. Kazu became confident that he was not imagining it, and the watch truly had a mysterious ability. At home, Kazu's sister kept complaining. She disliked how he refused to push back. He tried using a few-second rewind during an argument, just to see if he could phrase his words better. He He discovered that he could improve his replies in real time, but whenever he repeated the conversation to come out on top, he noticed an eerie effect in his sister's expression. She sensed something was off, as if she was experiencing déjà vu or gaps in the last few seconds. She became more suspicious of Kazu's calm tone in arguments, but she could not prove anything. Her frustration only grew, and it worsened the tension between them. In the meantime, Kazu decided that these short rewinds were not enough to address bigger humiliations. He wanted a more impactful advantage. One day during class, he fiddled with the watch's minute hand instead of the second hand, turning it backward by a full rotation of 5 minutes. He experienced a more intense rush of energy. The surroundings blurred and reformed. He found himself 5 minutes in the past, with full awareness of what had just happened. He tested it again when Hashi tried to publicly trip him in the hallway. He let it happen once, felt the humiliation, then reversed the watch's minute hand. He retook the path, carefully stepping around Hashi's attempt. This time, Hashi stumbled forward and fell in a comedic way, leaving other students laughing at him. Hashi was stunned, unable to figure out how Kazu predicted his move so precisely. Kazu felt a deep sense of satisfaction, though he remained outwardly quiet. After tasting this success, Kazu started using 5-minute rewinds more frequently. Whenever Reina tried to sabotage him, he allowed her to succeed once just to learn the details, then rewound and thwarted the plan. He refined this pattern until he found ways to make their attempts backfire without drawing too much suspicion. He found subtle ways to loosen Hashi's bag strap so that it fell off at the wrong time, or to place a small slip of paper on the classroom floor that would cause Reina to drop her items. These small embarrassments confused the bullies and slightly damaged their standing, but no one connected it to Kazu's watch. Classmates began to wonder if the once helpless Kazu had found a stroke of luck or if the bullies were getting sloppy. As Kazu repeated this cycle, he discovered a dangerous feeling growing inside him. The sense of controlling the flow of time gave him a rush of power. He was no longer satisfied with minor pranks. During a routine argument at home, Kazu's sister confronted him about how the rumors were now even more complicated. She demanded that he do something about them. Kazu tried to explain that he was dealing with the situation his own way, but she refused to listen. She said that if he did not stop the bullying or fix his reputation, she would kick him out of the house. She also threatened to inform the school counselor about his behavior. Kazu used a 5-minute rewind to avoid letting her escalate the argument. Each time she approached that topic, he reversed time to phrase his responses carefully, deflecting her blame. She noticed these repeated fragments in her mind and became deeply unsettled. Reina pushed her harassment too far by orchestrating a large-scale rumor that Kazu had stolen money from a class fund. The teacher demanded an explanation. Kazu felt cornered because the rumor included suspicious details that made him look guilty. Determined to fix this outcome, he turned the watch's hour hand in frustration. When his vision cleared, it was the previous night. He was in his bed with the memory of everything that had happened the next day. He realized that he had just jumped back nearly 24 hours. He spent the entire night planning a counterattack. He knew exactly what Reina would do the following day. When the day repeated, he arrived early at school, swapped out certain documents, and alerted the teacher about possible tampering with the class fund. By the time Reina tried to blame him again, the story collapsed because the teacher was already watchful and discovered inconsistencies that pointed back to Reina. She was forced to do damage control in front of several classmates, and she became furious. Kazu discovered that a full-day rewind allowed him to stage bigger revelations. This gave him a sense of unstoppable control, and he found that repeating the day allowed him to guess the teacher's moods, their schedules, and their likely decisions. He fine-tuned all of these points to corner the bullies. His sister noticed his calm demeanor. She found it unnerving. She heard from other students that Kazu was no longer the constant victim. Some said he moved like he predicted everything in advance, asking if he was blackmailing anyone or if he had found some hidden evidence, but Kazu refused to elaborate. At school, Kazu overheard an argument between Reina and Hashi. Reina accused Hashi of failing to keep Kazu under control. Hashi said he was tired of always being the muscle, while Reina reaped all the social benefits. Reina coldly told him that he was only useful for scaring people, and that if he could not handle Kazu, he was worthless. This exchange opened a possibility for Kazu to exploit their friction. He decided to use a few day-long loops to watch how they interacted in private. He learned that Hashi felt deep resentment, but he also feared losing Reina's approval. Kazu realized Hashi might eventually switch sides if he believed that Reina was too selfish. He rationalized that he deserved to do this because Reina and Hashi had broken his future first. He believed it was only fair that they feel the crushing burden of repeated failures. He also reminded himself that the scholarship opportunity might still be salvaged if he could prove that Reina's initial accusations were false. One afternoon, he felt an overwhelming anger toward his sister after she called him a coward yet again. He stormed into his room and attempted to turn the watch's largest hand to an extreme degree. The watch's cracked face flickered ominously, and he experienced a jolt that knocked him unconscious for a few minutes. When he awoke, he realized that the watch could be set to a save point that morning. From that moment on, whenever he twisted the watch's largest hand, he would snap back to a specific moment in time, effectively replaying the day from dawn as many times as he wanted. He tested this by allowing certain humiliations variations to happen, then reverting to the start of the day to correct them. It was far more convenient than a regular day-long rewind because he did not have to wait until evening. It gave him a godlike sense of control. He considered the watch an ultimate weapon now. Kazu's dark impulses grew stronger. He realized that he could interrogate people repeatedly, forcing them to reveal secrets in each loop. He tried this approach on Hashi. In one timeline, he cornered Hashi in a classroom after school. He locked the door, confronted Hashi with bits of blackmail that Kazu had gleaned from previous loops, and demanded a full confession of how he and Reina faked the cheating evidence against Kazu. Hashi resisted at first, so Kazu allowed the confrontation to escalate to the point where Hashi shoved him. Kazu noted every detail of Hashi's emotional reaction, rewound the day, and repeated the confrontation. This time, Kazu threatened to reveal certain secrets to the sports coach if Hashi refused to talk. Hashi looked visibly afraid. Kazu kept repeating variations of the day until Hashi eventually broke down in tears in one iteration. Hashi admitted that he never wanted to ruin Kazu's scholarship. He was just following Reina's orders. He said that Reina had manipulated him by promising certain social benefits and blackmailing him with knowledge of some wrongdoing he had committed in junior high. Kazu wrote down every detail so that he would not forget between loops. After finishing these repeated interrogations, Kazu rewound the day again so that Hashi had no memory of those intense sessions. This pattern convinced Kazu that he could similarly break Reina if he had enough loops. He realized that Reina was more cunning than Hashi. Meanwhile, Reina launched another rumor campaign to maintain her hold on the school's social structure. She disliked the slight damage to her reputation. She suspected that Kazu knew her every move. She did not know how he was doing it, but she decided to get rid of him in a more dramatic way. She convinced some teachers that Kazu might be forging certain documents behind the scenes to sabotage her. She plotted to hold an event in the auditorium where she would publicly reveal proof of Kazu's wrongdoing. She intended for him to be kicked out of the school or severely punished. Hearing about this plan through the rumors he gleaned in various loops, Kazu smiled coldly. He recognized that this would be the perfect opportunity for him to orchestrate a grand reversal of fortunes. He spent multiple loops preparing. He gathered evidence from Hashi's confession. He spied on Reina's messages in repeated versions of the day, analyzing her phone content from angles he gleaned after watching her type in a passcode. He compiled every piece of data that revealed Reina's manipulations. On the morning of the assembly, Kazu locked in a new save point. He repeated the day several times to test every contingency. In some loops, he confronted Reina too early, and she managed to dodge his accusations by lying or twisting facts. In other loops, Hashi tried to physically assault Kazu before the assembly could finish, causing confusion. Each time, Kazu took notes, rewound, and polished his plan. During one iteration, Kazu pushed the plan to a moral extreme. He arranged for Hashi's sports equipment to fail in such a way that Hashi risked physical injury. He tested how serious the injury might be, rewinding if the outcome was too dangerous or not shocking enough. He discovered that a moderate injury that left Hashi limping was enough to keep him from interfering. In the final iteration, Kazu triggered that scenario so that Hashi's shoelace came undone at a crucial moment, causing him to trip badly. Hashi sprained his ankle. Kazu rewound until he perfected the timing. In the final version, Hashi was left in the nurse's office, unable to rush to the auditorium in time. This was the first sign that Kazu was willing to risk real harm to others as long as it served his revenge. In the main assembly, Reina prepared to expose false evidence against Kazu. She believed that this public show would eliminate him once and for all. However, Kazu had already arranged for certain messages to be displayed on a screen. When Reina stepped up to speak, the teacher, who had been quietly influenced by Kazu, activated a projector that showed copies of messages in which Reina admitted forging documents. There were also logs of her threatening Hashi. Reina tried to defend herself by claiming Kazu had hacked her phone, but Kazu had timed everything so that more revelations would drop at just the right moment. Additional footage and audio emerged, pinned to a digital board that revealed how Reina forced a classmate to lie about Kazu's cheating. The audience of students began to whisper in shock, seeing Reina's manipulative side laid bare. Some of the faculty looked outraged. Reina's composure cracked, and she stumbled over her words. She tried to call for Hashi, but he was nowhere to be found because he was in the nurse's office. Kazu stood calmly at the side, feeding more evidence to the teacher in charge. As the crowd witnessed Reina's meltdown, many realized they had believed her illusions for far too long. She found herself cornered, desperately attempting to accuse Kazu of editing the data. Yet the phone records matched the official logs the teacher had verified the previous night. Reina's panic grew more visible. She tried to escape the stage, but the teacher demanded she stay for questioning. The entire auditorium was in chaos. Kazu felt an overwhelming surge of triumph. He saw Reina trembling, tears in her eyes, as students whispered about how she had framed him. He noticed that some classmates who had once mocked him now stared at him in awe, confused about how he gathered such ironclad evidence. He remained silent, content that his plan had succeeded. In the midst of that victory, he glanced at his sister, who stood on the side of the auditorium. Her face showed disbelief and a hint of fear. She wondered if he had done unethical things to gather so much detail. She recalled her disorienting arguments with him and how she felt time slipping in fragments. She realized something about him had changed in an unnatural way. The auditorium remained unnervingly quiet after the announcement of Reina's suspension. Teachers escorted her away from the assembly stage, and as she passed through the rows of onlooking students, it became clear she was far from repentant. She kept her head high, lips pressed into a thin line of fury, eyes scanning for Kazu. From his vantage point, Kazu watched the tension ripple through the crowd. The look on her face in that final moment wasn't one of resignation, it was a promise of retaliation. Outside, in the corridor, Reina's composure cracked. The teacher who accompanied her tried to offer a few words about the suspension terms, its duration, the official start date, but Reina barely listened. Her anger manifested in tight, jerky movements, hands clenched at her sides. She nodded just enough for the teacher to feel acknowledged, then brushed past with a curt gesture, heading down the hallway. A short while later, Kazu left the assembly area, intending to go home and process the day's events. He had taken only a few steps outdoors when he realized he wasn't alone. A flicker of movement in his peripheral vision made him turn, and there she was, Reina, standing near the side entrance of the school. She should have been on her way out, but instead, she lingered in the shadow of the building, her entire demeanor coiled with rage. There was an abrupt silence, heavier than any that had filled the auditorium. Kazu tensed, uncertain whether to continue past her or wait until she left. The decision was forced when she charged at him, eyes wild with a fury that had nothing to do with reason or negotiation. In that moment, Kazu's instincts flared. He sidestepped, managing to avoid the worst of her lunge, but she caught hold of his arm, nails digging in with painful pressure. She hissed something under her breath, words lost to the fury pounding in her veins. Her attack was clumsy. Kazu wrested himself free, stumbling a few steps back, his heart pounding. Reina glared at him, breathing hard. She seemed on the brink of another assault, but a distant voice, a security guard or teacher, echoed across the courtyard, breaking the moment. She froze, then spat a venomous look at Kazu before turning sharply on her heel and rushing away. Kazu stood rooted in place, the adrenaline slow to fade. He glanced at the faint red marks her nails had left on his arm, then at the empty space where she had just been. By the time Kazu reached home, the sky had grown dim, matching his unsettled mood. He silently passed by his sister, who was standing in the living room with a troubled expression. That night in his bedroom, he placed the cracked antique pocket watch on his desk. Its faint ticking lulled him into thinking that perhaps he would not need to rely on its power anymore. Now, with Reina sidelined, he longed for a normal life. He pushed the feeling aside, switched off the light, and let exhaustion lull him to sleep. He vowed he would not rely on the watch again. At morning, Kazu woke to a sense of wrongness gnawing at his thoughts. Shrugging it off as nerves, he went to school, expecting to see a place still rippling from the aftermath of Reina's downfall. Instead, he found the school atmosphere eerily similar to the previous morning. Anxious teachers whispered in corners. A notice board displayed the same announcements regarding a disciplinary hearing about Reina, as though it had never happened. Confused, Kazu tried to confirm the date on a wall calendar in the staff room. It listed the same date as the prior day. In the hallway, classmates repeated discussions about Reina's alleged wrongdoing, mirroring word-for-word phrases he swore he heard yesterday. His initial disbelief gave way to alarm. By lunchtime, it became clear the day had reset itself to the scenario before Reina's suspension was finalized. Despite his unease, Kazu replicated his steps, exposing Reina's new attempt to falsely frame him. She seemed unaware of any prior meltdown. She repeated the same tactics. Kazu thwarted her again, though he felt he was merely retracing old motions. By day's end, teachers again announced Reina's guilt and enforced the same suspension. Kazu went home with a dull headache, half convinced he had imagined the loop. He didn't recall using the watch, yet the same cycle greeted him the next morning. The entire day repeated with uncanny precision. Even if Kazu tried to change details, like avoiding direct conflict with Hashi or adjusting the time he left class, Reina's final humiliation remained the unavoidable outcome. Each night, he returned home unsettled, and each morning replayed the same scenario. Tiring of the loop, Kazu tried a radical tactic. Instead of carefully cornering her with evidence, he orchestrated a subtle misdirection. He slipped a note to Reina's closest friend, hinting that an urgent family matter required Reina's presence outside campus. He tampered with the class schedule, so she would believe an off-campus errand was mandatory before the day's end. By mid-afternoon, Reina raced off to chase this non-existent errand. Freed from her presence, the teachers never held the hearing. No meltdown occurred, and no suspension was imposed. Kazu anticipated that this might finally break the loop, yet the next morning repeated all the same. The day rewound, and Reina, back on campus, launched her false accusations anew. Each iteration left Kazu more exhausted. He tested countless micro-adjustments, rewinding minutes or hours to intercept rumors, sabotage written evidence, or diffuse heated arguments with Hashi, who sometimes served as Reina's reluctant ally. Despite occasional partial successes, the morning always restarted the entire drama. He noticed the watch's cracks deepening, its ticking growing louder whenever he forcibly rewound more than a few moments. He once glimpsed a faint glow beneath the glass, as if the watch was straining beyond its intended capacity. Realizing short loops could never fix the root problem, Kazu concluded that he had to revert the timeline to before Reina even considered framing him. If he jumped back multiple days, he could prevent the entire scenario from unfolding. So, one late evening, after again surviving the repeated meltdown, he grasped the watch with a trembling hand and twisted its largest dial. An electric jolt pulsed through his body, the air in his room rippled like heat haze, and the clock on his wall spun backward uncontrollably. Kazu awakened from the dizziness, expecting to land just a few days prior. Instead, he found himself standing in front of his high school's main gate, dressed in a uniform that felt strangely brand new. Around him, students chatted excitedly, as if it were the beginning of the academic year. A quick glance at a posted calendar inside the lobby confirmed his worst fear. This was the very first day of high school. Months, no, nearly a year, before Reina's meltdown. Kazu's bag felt heavier, and inside it, the cracked watch rested. He realized that by overusing its powers, he must have torn through the delicate threads of time, overshooting the intended point by a massive margin. Kazu wandered the corridors in quiet disbelief. Every classroom was set up for first-year orientation. Teachers who would eventually know him well passed by without recognition. If he tried to explain the loops, no one would believe him. Worse still, he remembered every humiliating confrontation, every repeated meltdown, every snippet of blackmail. None of that had happened in this timeline, but it existed in his memories, forging a lonely burden. Then, in the courtyard, he saw her, Reina, with the same sharp eyes but a more open demeanor than the cunning manipulator he'd come to know. This was before her social empire had formed. She glanced around with mild curiosity, noticing him in passing. They had never met in this reset timeline. Their eyes briefly met. She gave him a short, polite nod as new classmates often do, without the slightest flicker of recognition. No hatred, no memory of all the humiliations and rewinds. Kazu's heart thudded. He recognized her instantly, but she was seeing him for the very first time in her life. He stared at Reina, half expecting some leftover resentment from the loops, but her face merely showed the mild curiosity of a student meeting potential new classmates. Instead of the cold intensity, Reina greeted him with a polite curiosity. She pointed out an error in the posted classroom numbers, her tone helpful, even friendly. Kazu struggled to hide his shock. No trace of the cunning bully remained in her expression. In the days that followed, Kazu tried to avoid Reina altogether. He recalled too clearly how, in the old timeline, she engineered rumor campaigns and orchestrated repeated attempts to sabotage his reputation. Yet here, she was disarmingly polite, sometimes asking him casual questions. Which club was he thinking of joining? Did he need any help finding certain facilities? Kazu's nightmares and recollections of her savage gaze warred with the real-life interactions of this new Reina. Warm smiles, brief hellos, and not a hint of malice. He found himself stiffening whenever she approached, expecting the venomous plotting that never arrived. Over the next few weeks, Reina's approachability only increased. To Kazu's astonishment, she invited him to sit with her and a small group of classmates at lunch. The sense of dread in his chest flared each time she drew near, but her conversations were normal, about class activities, teachers' quirks, weekend plans. Those around her teased that she was so nice for guiding Kazu, who seemed painfully shy. Meanwhile, Hana, also free of the hurtful rumors from the old timeline, occasionally joined them, flashing Kazu a genuine smile. In this world, she had never turned away from him. She had no reason to doubt him. Then, one clear afternoon, after final period, Reina asked Kazu if he could accompany her to the old campus garden, a section typically used for horticulture club projects. He followed cautiously, bracing himself, but instead, beneath the shade of a large cherry tree, Reina confessed that she admired his quiet diligence, and that she had developed strong feelings for him. He could only stare, heart pounding, uncertain whether this was a cosmic joke or a redemptive timeline he should embrace.